Washington's up to number 3, 1 win, and they're in the college football playoff.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another live edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. You can check out all our written work over to si.com/college/Washington. Thank you for making this, whatever watch or listen this is of the day for you. Since we are recording this, I see 4:37 p.m. here on my computer, which is usually off on time, but whatever time it is. Lars, thank you so much for being here with us today, as always. And Washington is up to number 3 in the college football playoff committee rankings. Just instant reactions. What were some of your big takeaways from the second to last rankings?
Yeah, I mean, it basically was chalk for the AP poll, and that's basically what we thought coming out of the game against Washington State, where, it looked bad. It didn't look, it didn't look bad, but it wasn't a convincing win. It wasn't last season's 51-30 whatever game against Washington State in Pullman. But the fact of the matter is you can't fault Washington for winning, right? You can't penalize them for winning in the eyes of the committee. You can't say, oh, well, Washington's going to stay at, because then who do you move up above them, right? Just for how, I had this conversation with Mark Rogers earlier, where it's like, how do you, because some people had suggested that Florida State would move above Washington with a potentially better win. And it's like, well, it wasn't that much better of a win, one, and two, you still have Tate Rodemaker, who's not Jordan. With Jordan Travis, maybe. I can at least see an argument being more legitimately made there. As much as I would disagree with it, I'm willing to hear that argument. I'm not willing to hear with Tate Rodemaker. Now, all these questions get answered on Saturday. Well, Friday or Saturday, right? They get answered before the CFP reveals the final rankings on Sunday at, I believe, 10, 11, somewhere in that range?
Something like that around then, yeah.
It's like noon Eastern, so pretty early on the West Coast. And so it's a matter of just win your game and you're in. The other part for Washington that we probably can expand on more later, even if Washington loses, there's still a scenario which I certainly think you can make an argument that they're in the playoffs regardless as the 4 seed with a much tougher matchup against Georgia, likely in the Sugar Bowl. Whereas if you win the Pac-12 Championship over Oregon, you're in as either the 2 or 3 seed facing Michigan or whoever in the Rose Bowl.
Right. No, you're right. And that would definitely be the more favorable matchup for this team, of course. But I think the biggest thing is we need to talk about all the possible scenarios, because you and I were just talking real quickly as we were talking for the show about the precedent that it's set of putting Oregon at number 5, Ohio State at 6, Texas at 7, and Alabama at 8. Will, of course, like if Georgia loses, that's one thing. That's a somewhat unseen circumstance where, of course, the committee would probably find a way to put Alabama in there. Gives Washington an opportunity to move up if they're able to win. But I think that the biggest thing to kind of look at from this, just from the rankings as a whole, is what are all the possible outcomes for Washington? Of course, the simple one is win and you're in the Rose Bowl. That's it. That's it at this point, because I don't think there's any way if Washington beats Oregon and Florida State beats Louisville that those flip-flop, as you said, because Washington beating Oregon a second time would be I think that's arguably a bigger win than Michigan beating Ohio State at this point in the year, especially with the way that everybody's just kind of all over Oregon with the way that they're playing. I think that would probably be just the argument of just, yes, Washington is in the Rose Bowl. That's it. End of story.
Exactly. And I mean, it's a matter of the discussion begins if Washington loses, right? How badly do they lose? Is it reversed to October when Oregon lost 30? If it's a reverse 36-33 result with Oregon on the other side, I could see a case where with or without Georgia losing, if Texas loses, I mean, honestly, even if Texas doesn't lose, you're still talking about a 1-loss Washington team. That's the key factor here. They haven't, or as you said earlier, Oregon was the highest 1-loss team. They've been the highest 1-loss team throughout. Ohio State loses to Michigan, they fall 4 spots behind Oregon. How do you then, if you're the committee, if Oregon beats Washington, unless it's a boat race, unless it's a 42-7 boat race and Washington doesn't look anything of themselves, then certainly, yeah, I could see Washington falling behind Ohio State at 6 or 7 or whatever you want to say. But to move up to 3, even with the loss to the number 5 team, you can't tell me that they, then it becomes, okay, if Louisville beats Florida State, Louisville is not going to jump up from, I believe, 10-9, somewhere in that.
Yeah,
10. Yeah.
They're
not jumping up from,
right, yeah.
They're not jumping from either 10 or 9 to 4, right? So Louisville basically, with that win, would take the ACC out. And then it becomes, okay, do you take a second Pac-12 team? Do you take a one-loss Texas team? Again, head-to-head matchup, yes, Texas has the win over Alabama, but Washington has one win over Oregon as a top 5 team or top 10 team. So there's still a top 10 win for both of those schools. It depends on how you lose to Oregon, because if it comes down to Oregon gets in, they'd be the 3 seed, and then Washington would be the 4. We'll start, with Florida State losing and I guess in Washington losing, do they fall from 3 to 4 or do they fall from 3 to 5? Right? Because Oregon with the win would move up to either 4 or 3. I mean, this is, again, the easiest result is winning, you're in. But the amount of, with the spread being 9.5, almost 10.5, nobody thinks Washington's going to win this game. Again, they were favored. They were underdogs against Oregon State. So it's not that they haven't been underdogs before. That was only, a 2.5 point spread, 3 point spread.
I saw it even got as low as 1.5. Yeah. It was basically
right. So, basically a push with a slight edge because the game was in Corvallis on a neutral field. Washington now gets to, but they beat Oregon last season by 3 in Eugene. So it's a matter of, I think it's a matter of how you lose if you're Washington. If you lose a close game, I think you have an argument to get in as the 4th seed. If you lose the game,
right.
Yeah.
We're gonna get more into that. I gotta get into an ad read real fast. And it's great that you're talking about just odds, because we're gonna send a shout out to our friends over at FanDuel. Because as the weather cools down, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. And as you said, Lars, Washington is currently 9.5 point underdogs on FanDuel in this Pac-12 championship game. So that's going to be something that's really interesting to watch just kind of over the course of the week. And hey, I mean, maybe throw some money on the dogs. Who knows? Who knows what can happen this Friday? But if the last 2 matchups between these 2 teams say anything, it's that this is not going to be a multiple possession game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think that's kind of because I mean, as I told you though, I could see it to where Oregon covers the spread, but at the same point, it's a harder time seeing that. But I also don't see Washington blowing out Oregon either. So I think it's going to be one of those. Tell me the score at halftime. If it's within 10 at halftime, either way, 7, 10, 3, whatever you want to call it, then it's a 4-quarter game. If Washington gets behind the sticks early, and I'm not going to get too deep into a preview, but then that's kind of where the cause for concern comes into play, because the way Oregon has looked, if they get even a slight opening, they are going to run through the door. So it's a matter of, can Washington match stride for stride? Is Michael Penix healthy? It's indoors. It's probably going to be warmer than it's been in Seattle, and certainly it would be in Eugene. So it's perfect conditions. Rome Odunze goes back home to Vegas. Eddie goes back home to Vegas. All these guys. There's so many things for Washington where, yeah, you're underdogs, but you easily could still win this game. You just have to go out there and prove it. And I think that's fine, because if we're arguing, okay, well, hey, Washington should be in regardless because they're 12-0 and beat Oregon once. Well, okay, yeah, I mean, it sucks you have to beat them again, but do it again. Right. It is what it is.
No, it's absolutely that. And it's kind of a, I think I was just talking with Max Torres of Ducks Digest, and we kind of said the same thing, where it's really nice that it's come full circle. And the Pac-12 championship is a matchup between the actual 2 best teams in the conference, where, we kind of look at last year where Oregon had an argument, Washington came on so strong at the end there. And it's really great that we get this matchup with everything on the line. And especially with what seems to be a trip to the Rose Bowl on the line here too. I think it's just going to be so much fun to watch these 2 teams go head to head, and just there's so many words to use to describe, and I don't want to get too deep into our preview, as you said, but it's really exciting. Truly, I feel like that's just the best term to use here.
Well, yeah, I mean, as Mike Hopkins said, it's freaking cool. It's pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Like you're the first year and the last year that the Pac-12 is going to have a potential for a team finishing 12-0 in the regular season. Washington does that. I mean, that's kind of the identity of this team, right? Where everything that hasn't been done gets done by this team. Like nobody has done this, nobody's done that, nobody's done this, nobody's done that. Okay, well, it might not have looked the prettiest, but Washington has, right? They haven't lost to Oregon under Kalen DeBoer. That's just a fact.
No,
so
that's it. That's what we should be talking about. So we got a good question here. And looking at who played limited snaps in the Apple Cup, who do you expect to see at full strength on Friday? And that's a really good thing to talk about. And we are going to get to that on the other side of the break. But first, we're going to send a message to our good friends over at PrizePicks, because PrizePicks is the most fun you can have, winning up to 25 times your money this football season, and now you can play during basketball season too. All you have to do is select 2 or more players, pick more or less on the projected stats, and place your entries. One of the best things about PrizePicks is the reboot policy, so that your entries stay in place even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. PrizePicks is really simple to play. You can make your picks and submit your entries in less than 60 seconds. Do you want to get in on the action? Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege for a first, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. So that was a really good question about injuries, and it's something we talked a little bit about on our Tuesday morning show, so feel free to go check that one out as well. But I think that it's worth noting that it does feel like Tuli Gasanoa and Cameron Fabikilanen especially, and MJ Ale as well, since that was part of the question, are all going to have bigger roles in this game. MJ Ale didn't seem, and Tuli as well, didn't really seem to be injury-related, more as just kind of style of play and just chasing down Cam Ward, who's super athletic and does a lot of stuff outside the pocket. So and with not nearly as much of a run game as Oregon has. So I feel like both those guys are going to have much bigger roles against the Ducks on Friday.
Yeah, future UW quarterback Cam Ward, right? But no, that's a good point. It's and that's a tongue-in-cheek joke for those wondering. But no, yeah, that's kind of the thing, is where I think Cam Fab probably of the three is probably the healthiest, right? Of that group, just based on wear and tear in the season and things like that. But the two that are more important, arguably, are Tuli and MJ, right? Because Oregon, if they can run the ball, then Bo Nix can do whatever he wants, right? I mean, if you're able to control Oregon's run game, hold them to 110 total, 120.
Sure.
I mean, you're still giving up 100, right? But it's a matter of how that 100 comes about. Do you still keep them out of the red zone? Are you forcing Oregon into field goals instead of touchdowns? Or are you getting gashed for 12 yards on 3rd and 2? So it's a matter of, again, this game is going to be about timely defense. That's all it's really going to come down to. And so it's for all three of those guys, and potentially others that may or may not be able to play it, and how much they play is also the factor. I think it starts with Tuli and MJ up front, and then obviously Cam Fab making plays is going to be huge, right? Because the rotating door at safety has been brutal. But I think stopping the run is probably the more important one of the two if you have to pick one.
No, I agree. And I think that this is also a really good question here. Because Kraken Hawk asks, are the Huskies going to go 5 wide or unleash Dylan Johnson in the passing game? So it feels, that's a good question, as Lars asked Dylan Johnson earlier in the week. It feels like they're more likely to go 5 wide. One of the things that Max Torres mentioned on when I was on his show, which check out on Wednesday, that's going to be really fun. We had a full preview of the game. Everything was great. He mentioned that cornerback Jaleel Florence was seen on Oregon's cornerback, one of their starters, was seen on crutches during the Oregon State game, and that his status seems to be questionable at best for this game against the Huskies. And that would be a huge loss for Oregon. He's one of their starting defensive backs, and the Huskies, we know what they can do on offense, especially with this full complement of receivers. And it's something we've mentioned on multiple shows now, but something I want to mention again, that the only time all 6 of Washington's wide receivers that we projected in the spring that were going to be the top 6 on the depth chart outside of the Oregon State game, which was a monsoon, just horrible weather all around. This is the only other time all of those receivers have been active in the same game this season. And I think that that's going to be huge for the Huskies in this game.
Right, and it almost doesn't feel like that was the case, right? Because Giles had 1 target, 1 catch, Polk had 4 drops,
No,
McMillan had a
Giles
couple.
had more catches in that game. He had 6 catches. Or
Against
are you talking about the Oregon
series?
State game? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was thinking of the Oregon game. Yeah.
Okay, because you said Oregon. This is the only game that the Oregon State.
Yeah,
game
no,
was
my fault. I was thinking of Giles against Oregon.
Right, but I mean, even in both of those games, I mean, McMillan came back and went out, so it's a matter of like this feels like the healthiest that position has been. I think is because I told Mark Rogers that this is the first game, and because it really, I mean, it isn't, but it's really the first true game that all of them have been able to be on the field at the same time and executing with a healthier Dylan Johnson. And I mean, to the latter part of that question, man, I've been beating that drum for the last 11 weeks. I asked Ryan Grabus Roman mentioned on Monday, why did it take until the fourth quarter on the final drive to get Dylan Johnson his first target of the game? Part of that's on Penix, part of that's on Grubb, but that to me, it's one of those, if you can't run the ball against Oregon, you have to find Dylan to get some sort of involvement in the offense, because if you can't, and I mean, if Dylan can't, I would be surprised if Will Nixon and Tyber Rogers can, at least on a consistent basis. So if you're forced to throw 5 wide, that tempo better be quick, because if you're going to take advantage of those weapons, which Washington probably has the edge, 5 receivers versus Oregon's 5 or 6 defensive backs. I mean, Evan Williams got burned a number of times, but he made a couple of plays, right? So it's a matter of, again, this is going to come. It's exactly what I told you before the October game, where it's going to come down to about 4 or 5 plays.
Yes, absolutely.
On both sides of the ball. And that's combined on both sides of the ball. We're talking, probably 2 in the first half, 2 in the second half, and a kick here and there.
Right. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. I know on some of these abbreviated episodes, we got to find a way to get out of here because you got a basketball game to go to also. Yeah. But as always, thank you so much for being here. All the everydayers who tune in for this live and sounding off in the comments, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in. It means a lot to us. And if you're just learning about our channel for the first time, welcome. We appreciate you being here. Make sure you subscribe to us everywhere you get your podcast if you like the content. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode, because we're doing this all the time. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We are there. We are everywhere. We're uploading new content every single day. Our Wednesday show is going to be very heavy on the transfer portal, so make sure you tune in for that. Leave a like on the video. Leave us a 5-star review if you're audio only. Drop any comments questions, comments, concerns, anything like that in the comments. We try to get back to as many of you as we possibly can. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Wednesday.